Hello and welcome. Today we're embarking on an extended journey, not to a distant land, but to the defining decade of modern American life, the 1950s. We think we know this era, yet our collective memory, a beautifully curated archive of optimism and prosperity, often obscures the deeper, more complex reality. Close your eyes for a moment. What images flood your mind? Perhaps the wholesome perfection of a Norman Rockwell painting. Maybe the pastel glow of a suburban ranch home, a gleaming two-tone car in the driveway, and a family seemingly untouched by worry, gathered around a newly installed television set. This is the official America of the post-war era, a paradise built on the bedrock of victory and unprecedented economic power, where the American dream was perfected, packaged, and exported as the global standard for modern living. But memory, as historians know, is often a story we tell ourselves to maintain comfort. It smooths over the rough edges, rationalizes the contradictions, and silences the voices of dissent. What happens when we peel back the glossy veneer of the Sears catalog and listen closely to the deeper narratives, to the profound anxieties that ran beneath the surface of that manicured suburban lawn? Today, our purpose is not to simply shatter the myth, but to understand its architecture. We will step beyond the white picket fence and inside that perfectly maintained house, examining the silent pressures, the unspoken rules, and the systemic contradictions that defined an era that was simultaneously a golden age of abundance and a suffocating golden cage of conformity. This 2-hour exploration is the story of the 1950s American family, a tale rich in aspiration, complexity, and haunting reality. The melancholic jazz that greeted us will fade, replaced by the faint, rhythmic, almost mechanical hiss of a coffee percolator, signaling the start of the daily performance. The day in the suburban American home of the 1950s was not a scramble. It was a ritual. It was a quiet, methodical, and deeply serious performance of domestic certainty, the stage for which was the immaculate, pastel-colored kitchen where the curtain rose long before the sun. The lead actress in this daily drama was Mom. By 6 a.m., she was already in full costume, adherence to which was not a matter of vanity, but a form of emotional armor. She wore a neatly pressed house dress, a starched apron, and a fresh application of a bold lipstick shade like Revlon's Cherries in the Snow. Her hair, set in pin curls overnight, was a perfect helmet of domestic readiness. Her role demanded effortless perfection, from receiving the milkman to turning off the last light at night. The coffee percolator on the counter provided the soundtrack, its bubbling a constant, reassuring promise of the caffeine-fueled energy required to maintain the illusion of domestic bliss. The kitchen itself was a monument to the new age of consumer abundance. The post-war economy, fueled by wartime savings and the absence of foreign competition, had created an unprecedented middle class, and with it, a relentless advertising engine. This was the era where Americans were convinced that consumption was not merely a convenience, but a patriotic duty that signaled stability and success. As the family descended, the morning performance began in earnest. The children, meticulously scrubbed and dressed in clothes that felt slightly too stiff, took their seats with practiced quietness. They were taught a rigid code of conduct at the breakfast table: elbows off, chew with your mouth closed, and above all, no complaints. Complaining about food was treated as a cardinal sin, an insult to the post-war prosperity that defined their world. A protest over lumpy oatmeal would instantly be met with a gentle but firm reminder of the hungry children still struggling in war-torn regions, a potent guilt trip as reliable as the morning paper. The food itself highlighted the era's paradoxical relationship with progress. Orange juice was not freshly squeezed. It was a miraculous frozen concentrate, or perhaps tang, the powdered taste of the space-age future. The bread, Wonder Bread, was impossibly white, soft, and enriched with synthetic vitamins, symbolizing industrial perfection and scientific control over nature. The cereals were brightly colored, sugar-laced concoctions designed by marketing experts to create brand loyalty in children before they could even understand the concept of commerce. And then there was Dad. He was the patriarch, seated at the head of the table, often silent, shielded by the broadsheets of the local paper and the extensive anxiety-inducing headlines about the Cold War. He was the unquestioned provider and the authority figure. The numbers underscore the weight of his role. The expectation of the male breadwinner model was nearly absolute, with the majority of middle-class families relying entirely on his income to afford the new suburban mortgage, the gleaming chrome car, and the rising cost of a comfortable life. In 1950, only about 24% of married women were in the labor force, making his sole provision the family's existential necessity. His approval was signaled by a grunt about the coffee or a distracted comment on the weather, before he disappeared into a world of corporate reports and geopolitical threats. His emotional distance was not perceived as a flaw, it was part of his necessary stoicism. He was the sturdy oak, burdened by the silent weight of financial responsibility and the crushing pressure to never fail. The breakfast ritual was, therefore, much more than a meal. It was a daily, high-stakes rehearsal for life in 1950s America, a foundational lesson in conformity, emotional restraint, and the unwavering public performance of domestic happiness. At 8:01 a.m., the suburban house transformed from a family stage to a solitary fortress. The front door closed with an echoing click, and the sole actress was left to face the immediate aftermath. For the 1950s housewife, the workday was not over. It was just beginning. It was a relentless, invisible, and profoundly isolating marathon waged on a battlefield of endless chores and ever-escalating expectations. Her guide was a sacred text, often taped inside a kitchen cabinet: the schedule. Monday was laundry day, Tuesday ironing, Wednesday mending and baking, Thursday grocery shopping, Friday general cleaning. This rigid framework was designed to impose absolute order on domestic chaos. To deviate from this schedule was to risk failure, a public admission that she simply couldn't handle it all. A failure not of skill, but of character. Her tools were the new marvels of post-war technology, which promised liberation but often delivered elevated standards. The new automatic washing machine, a hulking, powerful beast, and the heavy, roaring vacuum cleaner were supposed to grant her freedom, but these conveniences were a profound double-edged sword. They did not actually decrease the workload, they merely raised the benchmark for what was considered clean and acceptable. Clothes now had to be dazzlingly white thanks to new detergents and bleach campaigns. Floors were not merely swept, they were polished to a mirror shine. The tracks left by the heavy vacuum in the plush wall-to-wall carpet became her lines in the sand, temporary victories against the constant, natural entropy of the home. But the hardest battle was the war against loneliness. The suburban house, a distant symbol of success, could be a gilded cage. The long, silent hours between the morning rush and the evening return were often broken only by the drone of a daytime radio soap opera, tales of dramatic lives that provided a stark contrast to her own, repetitive and controlled reality. This cultural framework, which preached that a woman's entire fulfillment could and should be found exclusively within her home and family, began to crack under the pressure. The deep unease, the problem that has no name, was later famously articulated by Betty Friedan in The Feminine Mystique. This book gave voice to the millions of educated, capable women who felt a profound sense of incompleteness and dissatisfaction despite achieving the promised domestic ideal. As this existential crisis spread, a chemical solution was offered. For what doctors diagnosed as nerves, female anxiety, or simply unhappiness, they prescribed tranquilizers like Miltown and later Valium. Research from the late 1950s and early 1960s clearly demonstrated that physicians prescribed tranquilizers to women at twice the rate they did for men. The pill, soon nicknamed Mother's Little Helper, became a pharmacological tool to enforce the cultural mandate of perpetual cheerfulness. It was a tiny chemical mechanism designed to take the edge off the relentless, crippling pressure to be perfectly, effortlessly content. While his wife fought her invisible war on the domestic front, the husband embarked on his own daily pilgrimage. He was the ubiquitous man in the gray flannel suit, a term that captured a generation of men who often felt they had exchanged their individuality and their dreams for the promise of unshakable financial security. His uniform was his armor in the corporate world, the anonymous suit, the sensible tie, and the heavy leather briefcase that carried not only the tools of his trade, but the immense, crushing weight of his entire family's future. The morning commute was a synchronized, silent ritual. Thousands of men, identical in their chrome-laden sedans, merging onto the new national highways that were the arteries of suburban life. The car, a central symbol of freedom and status, became his mobile isolation chamber, a place where he could exist, suspended between the two highly demanding roles of provider and patriarch. The world of work itself was a place of conformity, defined by beige walls, fluorescent lights, and rigid hierarchies. This was the era of the organization man, a phenomenon detailed by sociologist William H. White, who argued that corporate culture demanded total surrender of the self to the collective good of the company. The ideal employee was predictable, loyal, and utterly reliable. He was not supposed to question authority or rock the boat. His work, often abstract, involving endless paper shuffling and meetings, was not valued for personal fulfillment, but for the one tangible, necessary result: the paycheck. Between 1947 and 1957, the average American family income increased by nearly 30% in real terms, a powerful incentive to accept the corporate machine's demands. This prosperity, however, came at the cost of personal expression and existential anxiety. The pressure he faced was immense and rigidly unspoken. He was the sole economic foundation of the entire suburban structure. Failure at the office was not merely a personal setback. It was a catastrophic failure of his duty as a man, a husband, and a father. The culture denied men the language or the social permission to express doubt, fear, or anxiety. To admit struggle was to admit weakness. So these feelings were meticulously buried in the sports section, in a gruff joke with a colleague, and famously in the 2 martinis consumed during the ritualized 3-martini lunch, a form of daily self-medication for corporate pressure. But his true sanctuary lay in the garage or the basement workshop. Here, amidst the smell of sawdust, paint, and motor oil, he could escape the dictates of conformity. He was the master of this small universe. He could build a birdhouse, meticulously assemble a complex model train set, or tinker with the car's engine. These hobbies were a vital form of therapy. In a world where he felt like a powerless cog, here he could use his own hands to create, control, and fix things, allowing the man in the gray flannel suit to, for a few precious hours, simply remember what it felt like to be a man. And what if the children, the baby boomers? They were the largest, most celebrated, and most intensely scrutinized generation in American history, with over 76 million Americans born between 1946 and 1964. Their childhood was a protected paradise, shielded from the economic scarcity of the Depression and the global conflict of the world wars. They had spacious yards, well-funded new schools, and an array of toys unimaginable to their parents' generation. Yet this paradise was governed by an equally rigid set of unwritten laws. 1950s children were raised to be, above all, well-behaved. They were viewed as miniature adults whose primary duty was to reflect positively on their parents' social standing. A misbehaving child was a glaring crack in the perfect facade of the suburban family. Respect for authority was paramount and non-negotiable. Teachers, policemen, clergy, and of course their parents were to be obeyed without question. The parental phrase, "because I said so," was the final word, ending all negotiation. This system created a generation that was disciplined and outwardly respectful, but one often hesitant to challenge authority or think critically for themselves. Their emotional lives were also meticulously managed. The full spectrum of childhood emotion, anger, deep sadness, fear, was often dismissed or actively discouraged. Boys were told to be a man and suppress tears. Girls were expected to be agreeable and cheerful. The goal was to produce emotionally uncomplicated, agreeable children. Feelings were messy, unpredictable, and they simply did not fit into the neat, orderly world their parents were desperate to maintain. Beyond the immediate domestic anxieties, a deeper, existential dread permeated the protective bubble. The Cold War. Children were regularly subjected to terrifying duck and cover drills in schools, taught by instructional films like Bert the Turtle, to hide under their flimsy wooden desks in the event of an impending nuclear attack. The sheer absurdity of this instruction created a profound cognitive dissonance. The expectation to live a perfect, simple life while constantly preparing for atomic annihilation. This innocence was a fragile shell, constantly threatened by the unseen danger. Furthermore, the complexities of adult life, money problems, marital tensions, political anxieties, were zealously hidden. The greatest taboo was sex, shrouded in euphemism and awkward silence, forcing children to piece together a confusing and often inaccurate picture from schoolyard whispers and forbidden glances at anatomy books. The decade's introduction of rock and roll, championed by figures like Elvis Presley, was seen by many parents as a dangerous, sexualized, and subversive force, the first cultural sign that their carefully constructed emotional and moral landscape was about to be violently torn apart by the very generation they had tried so hard to protect. The suburban house was never an isolated entity. It was the essential component of an archipelago of conformity, a community governed by a complex and relentless unwritten social code. To settle in the suburbs was to enter a binding social contract, the very first clause of which demanded absolute attention to appearances. The front lawn was the ultimate public face of the family. It was not merely a patch of grass, it was a highly visible canvas upon which a family's character, diligence, and moral standing were perpetually displayed. A lush, flawlessly green, perfectly manicured lawn was the signal of a respectable, hardworking, and successful family. Conversely, a lawn with brown patches, or the horrific presence of dandelions, was seen as a telltale sign of laziness and moral decay. The Saturday morning ritual of mowing the lawn therefore became the neighborhood's silent arms race, a localized Cold War fought with fertilizer, pesticides, and perfectly straight hedge clippers. The social surveillance was constant and powerful. It emanated from behind meticulously drawn curtains and over freshly painted fences. The character of Mrs. Kravitz from Bewitched was not a caricature. She was a reality in every neighborhood, embodying the neighborhood gossip network. Who was visiting you? What time did you get home last night? Was your laundry hung out on Sunday in violation of local custom? Every action was observed, cataloged, and discussed in the quiet, deadly arena of neighborly judgment. This relentless scrutiny created a suffocating pressure to conform, where houses were painted in approved color palettes, cars were washed weekly, and any display of genuine individuality was viewed with deep suspicion. But the unwritten code contained a far darker, institutionalized element: exclusion. The idyllic, sprawling suburbs of the 1950s were, by design, overwhelmingly, exclusively white. This was not an accident of preference. It was a matter of deliberate, codified policy, both official and unofficial. Federal policy played a direct, catastrophic role. The Federal Housing Administration, FHA, which insured the vast majority of mortgages for these new suburban homes, explicitly deemed racially mixed or minority neighborhoods a high financial risk. Their underwriting manuals assigned the lowest rating, signaled by a red line on the map, to areas where non-white residents lived or were expected to live. This practice, known as redlining, effectively starved Black communities of capital and made it functionally impossible for most Black Americans to obtain the low-interest, government-backed mortgages required to purchase a home in these new developments. Beyond federal policy, restrictive covenants, clauses legally written into property deeds, explicitly forbade the sale of homes to African Americans and other minorities. Even after the Supreme Court declared these covenants legally unenforceable in 1948, the practice of exclusion continued through gentlemen's agreements, intimidation, and overt discriminatory practices by real estate agents. The result was a landscape of enforced segregation, creating profound and lasting inequalities in American society, and disproportionately locking Black families out of the primary mechanism for building generational wealth. The white picket fence, then, was not merely charming. It was, for millions, a painful, tangible barrier, clearly defining who belonged and who was permanently excluded from the American dream. To understand the heart of the 1950s home is to step inside the kitchen, which had become an altar dedicated to the new god of convenience and scientific processing. It was a gleaming temple of chrome, Formica countertops, and revolutionary new appliances that promised to permanently liberate the housewife from domestic drudgery. The refrigerator was no longer a simple icebox, it was a massive pastel-colored appliance with a dedicated freezer compartment, a technological marvel that allowed for the storage of entirely new categories of food, chief among them the TV dinner. These compartmentalized aluminum trays, filled with a Salisbury steak of questionable origin, watery vegetables, and a rock-hard brownie, were the ultimate symbol of the future. They promised a full, no-effort meal, freeing the family to gather around their new electronic hearth, the television. This absolute obsession with convenience and novelty, however, often resulted in bizarre culinary creations. The undisputed champion of 1950s cuisine was the Jell-O salad, or Jell-O mold. It was a dish that defied both logic and taste, existing as a science experiment more than a food. Savory or sweet, anything and everything was suspended in translucent, wobbly gelatin. Shredded carrots, olives, tuna fish, canned soup, miniature marshmallows, or even hot dogs. The Jell-O mold was the technicolor trophy of post-war optimism, a visual manifestation of a culture that believed science could improve upon nature in every way. The decade was defined by the heavily processed, the canned, and the boxed, foods that promised speed, uniformity, and a shelf life that defied logic. Beyond the food itself, the cultural phenomenon of Tupperware offered a unique social outlet. It was more than just a set of airtight plastic containers, it was a new kind of social ritual. The Tupperware party, hosted in suburban living rooms across the nation, was part sales pitch, part support group. Here, women, many of whom had left wartime jobs or held college degrees, could become entrepreneurs, earning their own PIN money and building small businesses outside the direct supervision of their husbands. More significantly, it created a dedicated, safe space where women could gather, share stories, and celebrate the shared challenges and small triumphs of their isolated domestic lives. The famous burp of the Tupperware seal symbolized not just freshness, but a brief moment of order, control, and female solidarity in a world that often felt chaotically demanding. No single invention shaped the 1950s American family more profoundly than the television. In less than a decade, it transformed from a rare luxury to the essential piece of furniture in nearly every home. In 1948, only 1% of American households owned a set, By 1955, that figure had rocketed to 64%, and by 1960, it was nearly 90%. The TV became the new national hearth, the electronic center around which family life was completely reorganized, dictating dinner times, bedtime routines, and evening entertainment. The programs broadcasted, the sitcoms, painted an unmistakable picture of an ideal, achievable America. Shows like Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, and The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet presented a world that was gentle, wholesome, and reassuringly simple. In these television families, fathers were always wise, mothers were infinitely patient, and children were mischievous but fundamentally good. Every problem, no matter how trivial, was neatly introduced and completely resolved in 22 minutes, concluding inevitably with a warm chuckle and a clear moral lesson. These shows were far more than mere entertainment. They functioned as widely distributed instructional manuals. They taught millions of families how to be the perfect 1950s family, reinforcing strict gender roles, celebrating the consumerist suburban lifestyle, and promoting a vision of America that was conspicuously white, middle class, and free of serious conflict or dissent. While this provided a comforting escape from Cold War anxieties, it also established an impossibly high, flawless ideal against which real, messy families could feel only inadequate. The television also served as the primary and most immediate conduit for the era's existential fears. Every evening, trusted, fatherly anchors like Walter Cronkite would enter the living room and explain the terrifying global landscape. They delivered the news of the growing threat of communism, the escalating nuclear arms race, and the nationwide duck and cover drills with a calm, steady authority that made even the most terrifying headlines feel manageable. This juxtaposition was surreal and psychologically taxing. In the same room where a family had just watched a heartwarming sitcom about a lost pet, they were now being shown animated diagrams of a mushroom cloud and taught how to build backyard bomb shelters. The television effectively brought the existential dread of the atomic age right into the heart of the domestic sanctuary, creating a strange cognitive dissonance where the comforting glow of the screen simultaneously illuminated the American dream and the American nightmare side by side every single night. So, we return to the picture we started with, the portrait of the perfect 1950s family. Does it still appear perfect? Or do we now see the subtle cracks beneath the flawless, polished surface of the photograph? The 1950s was an era of profound, systemic contradiction. It was a time of unprecedented financial prosperity, built upon a foundation of suffocating social conformity. It was an age of boundless technological optimism, shadowed by the crippling anxiety of nuclear annihilation. It was a time of liberation through appliances, yet simultaneous deep social repression through codified segregation and restrictive gender roles. The people who lived through this era were not the simple caricatures often presented in nostalgia. They were complex human beings navigating a world of seismic and often confusing change. They were striving not just for material wealth, but for an ideal, a dream of stability and security that they believed would permanently shield them from the chaos and uncertainty of the modern world. In their pursuit of this ideal, they built a beautiful cage for themselves, a golden cage of suburban comfort and social order. It was safe, it was predictable, but its limitations were severe. It rigorously limited the economic roles women could play, the emotions men were permitted to express, the intellectual questions children were allowed to ask, and most cruelly, the people, primarily African Americans and other minorities, who were allowed to participate in and benefit from the wealth of the American dream. The ultimate legacy of this golden cage is that the tensions it suppressed did not disappear, they simply intensified. The seeds of the social and cultural upheaval that exploded in the 1960s were meticulously sown in the silences and contradictions of the preceding decade. The restless, educated housewife gave birth to the women who would launch second-wave feminism. The conformist organization man raised the children who would form the counterculture and reject corporate life. The architecture of the segregated suburb fueled the demand for civil rights and urban equality. The pressure for absolute perfection ultimately led to a necessary explosion of rebellion. To fully understand the 1950s is to understand the foundations of the world we live in today. The echoes are everywhere. In our ongoing struggles with equity and racial inequality, in the persistent battles over traditional gender roles, and in our modern obsession with projecting a perfect, curated life, a pressure that has been magnified 1,000 times by the lens of social media. The compulsion to keep up with the Joneses has not vanished. It has simply migrated online. We must look back at this decade not with simple nostalgia or harsh judgment, but with necessary empathy, recognizing the profound humanity of the people who lived in that time. We must appreciate their dreams of security and, critically, learn from the systemic mistakes embedded in their pursuit of that ideal. The story of the 1950s American family is, in the end, the story of us. A timeless human struggle to find a durable balance between security and freedom, between the suffocating demand for conformity and the liberating truth of authenticity, and between the picture-perfect image and the complex, messy, beautiful reality of who we really are. If this journey into the architecture of the American dream resonated with you, if you found yourself reflecting on the echoes of the 1950s in our world today, please take a moment to engage with this conversation. Like this video if you feel this history is important to understand. Comment below and share your own thoughts on what the golden cage means to you. And finally, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to join us as we continue to deconstruct the myths and reveal the complex truths of history. Thank you for watching.